So we were discussing Sfiras Omer Minat Torah, Midrabanan, but there's another dispute among the Rishonim also regarding Sfiras Omer. Now we touched on also before, but we know when we count Sfira, there's a mitzvah to count days and a mitzvah to count weeks, as the Gemara tells us in Menachos. One opinion, the Gemara says that you only count days because it's only Zechel Mikdash today. Our meaning is we count days and weeks. So days and weeks, one mitzvah or two mitzvah. So Rabbi Yerucham's opinion is that counting days and weeks are two separate mitzvahs. And in fact, Bizman Shabeis HaMikdash Kayim, he used to make two separate brachas. He holds Bizman Hazeh, only days are Daraisa. That's the independent mitzvah. Weeks is connected to Rabbanan. Even though, that being said, why not make a bracha on a mitzvah Rabbanan? That gets into a separate shaila. So it's not just on a regular mitzvah Rabbanan you would make a bracha. But the question is the Zeichel HaMikdash. So among Zeichel HaMikdash, there's a discussion, there's a whole brisker Rav on it. What type of Zeichel HaMikdash do you make a bracha on? When don't you? Because let's say when else do we have a Zeichel HaMikdash? Let's say we had it on Pesach, by the Korach sandwich. So we do Zeichel HaMikdash, Hillel. So the question is, anyway, that wouldn't really be a proof, because maybe the bracha you made on the matzah and the maror already going on it. But that's a discussion that what types of Zeichel HaMikdash you do make, when don't you make the Baal HaMorah. The reason why there's no Shechiyanu on Sfira, because it's a Zeichel HaMikdash. But Shechiyanu, no, but a regular bracha. So clearly, that's a discussion, but Rabbi Yerucham apparently holds no bracha on this type of Zeichel HaMikdash. And one of the proofs that we do it like an apparent contradiction, because when we start saying Sfira, what do some people say? Hineni muchen lezumen yekayim mitzvahs aseh shenema, implying that Sfira is a mitzvah in our Torah today. There's a Shlomo Zalman, there's no discussion. Maybe it's Baal Tosef. If we hold it's not the right, so how could you say that? That's a separate issue. But then at the end, after Sfira, you say Harachmanu Yachzilanu Avodas Beis HaMikdash Umkoma. Like, what do you mean? So if it's a mitzvah in our Torah, it never left us. It's only you're assuming it's a Drabanan, it's a Zeichel HaMikdash, you want to bring it back. So that's for a separate time. But therefore, it's only those who do both. If you only do one, it's not necessarily, it wouldn't be a contradiction. But in the Siddur it has both, so most people do both. But either way, that's the Machlokas. Rabbi Yerucham holds days and weeks are separate mitzvahs. And Bizman Hazeh, only days are biblical, weeks are Drabanan. The other Rishonim seem to hold go equal. The Rambam, it's both Daraisa, days and weeks. And according to Tosfos, both days and weeks are Drabanan. That's what Tzvi Pesach Frank pointed out. That's the Nusach of the Svardim, the real Svardim. How do they count? They break up the days and weeks. They say La Omer in between days and weeks. Let's say, I'll say today is the 16th day of the Omer, which is, so then they would say La Omer, and then they say, which is 2 weeks and 2 days. That's how they would say. We do La Omer at the end. So why do they do it that way? So the Tzvi Pesach Frank points out they're following the opinion of Rabbeinu Yerucham, who holds days are biblical, weeks are Durabanan. So to show a clear demarcation between the biblical and the rabbinical, we say Omer, like we do by benching. The first three brachas are biblical: Moshe, the Man, Hazana Sakol, Yoshua, Eretz Yisrael, David and Shlomo, Yushalayim, and Aruge Beitar is Durabanan. So how do we end the third bracha? Very strangely, Bona Bracha Yushalayim, Amen. We answer Amen to our own bracha. Why? So the Rishonim say, because we want to show it's the end of the unit and we're beginning a new unit. So anytime we want to separate our biblical with rabbinical, we make some demarcation. So that's what the Svardim do. They break up La Omer days and weeks. We don't have a problem because we assume either they're both biblical or both rabbinical. There's no need to do it in the middle. We do it at the end. But as I pointed out anyway, even if we don't do it at all, it's still a go. So that's another machlokas, days and weeks. And therefore, the Beis HaLevi points out if someone missed day 5, so let's say you don't continue counting day 6 with the bracha, but day 7, 14, 21, 28, the weeks you still can with the Beis HaLevi sheet. So clearly working with Rabbeinu Yerucham that days and weeks are separate brachas. So what happens if one misses a complete day? So we know there's a famous shitas of the Bahag. The Bahag, he has a big chiddush. We say that the Torah tells us you have to count 7 complete weeks, tamima. So the simple understanding of that means you count at night during the day, because many mitzvahs begin during the day, shaking the lulav, eating matzah, or eating matzah doesn't, sitting in the sukkah doesn't either, but shofar does. There are many mitzvahs that begin during the day. So how come Svira doesn't? So the simple reading of the pasuk is tamima you count at night, you want a complete day. And Tosfos goes so far, even Ben Nishma-s says l'chadchila you should count. So, however, that's the simple pshat. But the Bahag has a big chiddush in Tamimas. The Bahag writes that if one forgets one day, you can no longer count anymore. And people assume, what's the pshat in the Bahag? Why can't you count anymore? It must mean the Bahag must hold it's one big mitzvah. In other words, it's one big mitzvah, so once I miss one of the 49 parts, it's over. So the Bahag says if you miss a day, it's over, based on tamimas. You need a complete count, and therefore once you miss any day from 1 through 49, you can no longer count anymore. According to the Bahag, there's no point in counting, period. In other words, the mitzvah is over. If you assume the Bahag holds that it's one big mitzvah. Most Rishonim disagree with the Bahag, and they say that no, there are 49 separate mitzvahs, and who cares if you missed one day, even if you miss 48 days. You can miss the first 48 days, but day 49, every day is a separate mitzvah. That's what most Rishonim hold. So it's a machlokas, everybody against the Bahag basically. Most assume every day is a separate mitzvah, and the Bahag holds if you miss a day, you're finished. So how do we paskin? What do we do if we miss a complete day? So it goes like this. If we miss at night, so let's say we didn't count tonight. So if you remember now, count. But let's say you woke up in the morning and you realized you had a nightmare that you forgot Sfiras Omer. And you don't need a tightness chalom for that, but it is bad. But you forget, so it's okay. You can make it up the next morning. You have the whole day to make up Sfiras Omer. And that's what you do, is you count during, because that's a separate, the machlokas. Are you allowed to count during the day at all? Is the mitzvah only at night, because tamimas, or is the mitzvah during the day? That has to do with the discussion on the Ksiras Omer, but that's a discussion in the Rishonim as well. But so what we do is, that's why we count during the day without a bracha, because according to some, say you can't count during the day. So therefore, if you miss tonight, you count tomorrow. I can't say the date yet, because I don't want to mess myself over. So, but you count tomorrow. You count today's date tomorrow, and then when you get to tomorrow night, then you can continue counting with the bracha. So the way we assume this, the simple reading is if you don't miss a complete day, if you remember tomorrow, you count without a bracha, and then the following night you keep on going like nothing happened. That's the normative psak. And then the normative psak is that let's say one realized they missed the whole day yesterday, and it's tonight, so what do you do? So the psak is, again, seems to be another compromise, because according to the Bahag it's over, but most assume not like the Bahag. So therefore, in deference to the Shittas of Bahag, we don't make a bracha. We definitely continue counting, and therefore you continue counting without a bracha. So again, so the ideal, you count tonight with the bracha. You miss tonight, you remember tomorrow, count tomorrow without a bracha, and then you continue counting with the bracha the following nights, etc. If you miss a complete day, so it's not that you have an option, even if you missed the first 48 days, you missed the first 3 days, you're always obligated to count every day, because we assume most Rishonim hold it's a separate mitzvah. The only reason we're not making a bracha is because of the Shittas to Bahag. So in fact, the Rav Soloveitchik used to always say, when you have to know your Baal Habatim, in other words, you got to know who you're talking to when you're giving up. It's a good idea in general, but when you're giving up psak, you have to know who the crowd is. So he says, because how does it work with many people aren't as knowledgeable in Torah? So you tell them, you know what? Let's say someone came to you and they said, you know what, I missed last night, or I missed the past 2 nights. What should I do? So you tell me, you know what? Okay, continue counting without a bracha. What do you mean no bracha? Why can't I make a bracha? Rabbi, you can't start explaining them what. There's no. Oh, so what do they think? Oh, no bracha doesn't really count. The rabbi is just trying to make me happy, and then they stop counting. So as Rav Selevan likes pointing out, there's a Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara in Sukkah talks about sitting in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Not in Israel, that's a no-go. But in Chutz La'aretz, the Gemara discusses whether one should sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. So the Gemara has different opinions, and the Gemara concludes, Yatzvi Yasvinan Bruche Lo Mivarchinan. You sit in the Sukkah without a bracha. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins that way as well. So we know what happens. Not everyone, but many people eat inside on Shmini. Oh, I don't have to make a bracha. I don't have to really eat in the sukkah. It's not a real eating in the sukkah, and therefore I go inside. So we see when you tell someone, see, that's a good thing. It's not a good thing that they're doing the wrong thing. It's a good thing that they think brachas are very important, which they are, but from a legal point of view, 99% of the times, blessings aren't an obstacle in performing a mitzvah, whether it's tefillin, tzitzis, matzah, anything. People think, oh, I didn't make the bracha, I don't get the mitzvah, nothing doing. Of course, you do get the mitzvah, you should make the bracha, but brachas usually are just a preparation to get you into the proper mode of doing the mitzvah. That's why the No de Yehuda, he wouldn't have an apparent contradiction. He's against the Hineni Muchan Wazuman. In fact, he's against it in general. He's against the Hasidim in general. Well, he was. During that time, there was a lot of fighting between the Hasidim and the non-Hasidim. So he was against them making up the Hineni Muchan Wazuman because he felt that's what the Birchas HaMitzvah is for. I don't need any extra preparation. When I make a bracha, I'm supposed to. So he was against. He didn't make not only on Sfira, he was against it on all things. So in fact, they say over in one of the yeshivas in Brooklyn, one of the Hasidic yeshivas, I believe the No Devita died during the middle of Sfira. So on his yard site, they don't say Hinei Muchan Ozum and this out covered to the No Devita. I don't know if the story. I don't know if it's true or not, but it sounds good. I'm not even sure if the No Devita died during Sfira, but I guess we have to check out both factors. But either way, the point being is he was against saying it because what do you need Hinei Muchan Ozum? And just say. So, for some reason, I don't know why, in the Sidurim, we don't have it before we do other mitzvahs, but some reason in Sfira it's there so everyone says it. I'm not saying not to say it, but then the No Yehuda was against it and everything, not just by Sfira. And that's what I pointed out. That's the famous, the No Yehuda was known to be against the Hasidim, so he wrote strong words about the Hasidim in his Tshuva. So, when his grandson, 100 years later, whatever it was, when the Hasidim and the Litzvish were getting along, so he was reprinting his grandfather's Sefer, so he went to the Divrei Chaim, the Sons of Rav, and said, you know what, I know there were, between our grandparents, they didn't really hit it off, Hasidim, this and that, but we hit it off, you know what, I want to change. My grandfather had strong words against the Hasidim. When he wrote the Tshuva, so one of the things he wrote, he changed the pasuk in Tanakh. In other words, to making fun of the Hasidim. The pasuk said, God's ways are straight. The tzaddikim follow them, and the pasuk says, "U'aposhrim," and the stumblers poshibo, like the sinners stumble over them. So instead of putting the word poshim, he put Hasidim. He said the righteous follow them, and the Hasidim stumble over them. That was he probably had a lot worse language. That was one. So the grandson of the Jew said to the Divrei Chaim, maybe I should change it, because he says Chas v'Shalom. The Divrei Chaim said, your grandfather turned Poshim into Hasidim. You want to turn Hasidim back into Poshim? Now let's leave it the way it is. But either way, I think that's the way it remains in the original right now in the Sefer. So therefore, the point being is, he points out that he was against the Hinei Muchan Ozum anyway. So that's why. So people think that if you don't make a bracha, that's it, it's over. So Rav Selevan used to tell people, you have to know. So if someone's going to ask you, and you ask them that if you tell them, you can count without a bracha, and they say, I understand what that means, no bracha, that means it doesn't count, I'm not going to count, you should tell him to count with the bracha. Because really, strictly speaking, we paskin not like the Bahag. We paskin every night's a separate mitzvah. So really, strictly speaking, we can make a bracha every night even if we miss. The only reason we don't, the Mechaber brings down, and the Mechaber in general is very strict, because he holds saying God's name in vain is a deraisa in a bracha. And in general, that's why the Sfardim don't have women make brachas. In general, the Mechaber is strict. So it's just in deference to the Bahag Shita, which is a minority view, and we don't usually accept la halacha, so therefore we do it. But if you're a Ben Torah, you can explain to them that really we paskin, and you can do the mitzvah without the bracha, so that's what you do. But to someone who's not really going to get it, the Rav says better that he should count every night with a bracha than not counting at all. So if someone's going to understand the code that no bracha means I'm not counting anymore, better than to count with the bracha, because that's the way we really paskin. It's only in deference to that's only a al-tzafik bracha, so a hakel will lenient. So that's what the Rabbi used to always say. So to the point out, so we have a machlokes. Number one, we have a machlokes in general whether Sfir is the Raisa Drabanan today. We have a machlokes whether days and weeks are one mitzvah or two, and that's why the Sfardim break up La Omer in the middle, because they hold days are biblical, weeks are Drabanan. Then we have another famous machlokes whether Sfiras Omer, as I like pointing out, it's one of the easiest mitzvahs and it's one of the hardest mitzvahs. It's one of the easiest mitzvahs because it takes about a couple of seconds to do, but it's one of the most difficult mitzvahs because it takes 7 weeks to do. So therefore, so they point out that when it comes to days and weeks, so we said, so therefore the Sfardim say, well, Omer and the Beis Halevi said if you got it in the middle, you could still go 7, 14, 21 with the bracha. And then we pointed out the Bahag just says that if you miss a day, you can no longer count. So we assume, and we'll have to give another share on Rav Soloveitchik's pshat, that's not what the Bahag means, but what the simple pshat is, it means it's one big mitzvah, and therefore that's why if you miss a day, it's machlokas rishonim, we generally assume not like the Bahag, and therefore if we miss a day, we still continue counting, but in deference to the Bahag, we don't make a bracha. So again, so at night, if you remember tonight and you haven't counted, count with the bracha. If you remember tomorrow during the day, since it's a shiloh, whether you can count during the day at all, so we count without a bracha. Then the following night, continue counting with the bracha. If you miss a complete night, a complete day, then you have a chiyuv to count every night without a bracha. But if someone's going to think without a bracha means not counting, better to count every night with a bracha, because you definitely have a chiyuv to count sfira. We're just being machmer for the shitas of Bahag. So we'll have to continue next week about what is the pshat in the Bahag. All the Bahag says is that if you miss a complete day, you can't continue counting. So we assume that means it's one big mitzvah. We'll have to see Rav Soloveitchik's understanding of the Bahag and the different practical differences that come up in this new explanation. Anyone who's basically has a birthday between Pesach and Shavuos, the Shiloh could come up. Obviously not every year, but only the year you become bar mitzvah. So the Minchas Chinuch and other Achronim raised the Shiloh, what happens if somebody becomes bar mitzvah in the middle of Svira? So can he continue counting with the bracha? So let's make a couple of assumptions, or else it's not really a Shiloh. I mean, it might be, but if you assume, number one is, if you assume that he's been counting all along as a katan, let's assume that, because we even assume a gadol who's not counting doesn't continue counting with the. Let's assume assumption number one, a katan has been counting as a katan, and secondly, we're assuming perhaps it's one big mitzvah. Because if it's separate mitzvahs, so what's the difference? I mean, unless you want to tie maybe to mimas, it would make a difference, but Pashas every day is a different mitzvah. So let's make those two assumptions in the Shaila, that it's one big mitzvah and the Katzan's been counting. You could argue on both, but that makes the kasha stronger. So a katan who's been counting in your home, and it's one big mitzvah, can a katan continue counting? Because what's the issue? Because the Torah tells us tamimus. Tamimus just means actually starting to count at night. It's the Bahag Skiddush of tamimus that it means, according to some one big mitzvah. We haven't gotten into the Bahag yet. So the question is, the issue is, if someone does, what's the shayla? Because a katan's exempt. Min Torah, a katan doesn't become chayiv in anything until bar mitzvah. So min Torah, so let's say he became bar mitzvah on day 22 of the Omer. So min Torah, it was a non-existent. So he's coming into this world of Omer on day 22. So but he was counting. So the question is, can someone who does a mitzvah during the state of exemption, can it be mitzdaref later for when he becomes chayav? In other words, the katan, when he was counting, he was pater, but he counted anyway. So could I say the act that he did when he was a katan, could that help to keep, like the tamimus, to keep the counting, and therefore count for the mitzvah? So let's go through Shas and check. So there's a famous Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah talks about someone who is temporarily insane. So let's assume for our purposes, we'll make it simple. During the hours of 8 and 9, he is insane. From the hours of 9 and 10, he's sane. It doesn't work that way, but let's assume it just to make it simple. So 8 to 9, insanity. 9 to 10, insanity. No, 9 to 10, he was sane. So let's say the Gemara is talking about Rosh Hashanah, about eating, even though it's Gemara Rosh Hashanah, it's about eating matzah. Someone eats matzah, Leil Pesach, during 8 and 9, during the eats a kazayas matzah between 8 and 9 when he was a shota. And then at 9 to 10 he wakes up, he's normal. Shailat is chayav to eat another piece of matzah or not. Because when he ate the matzah, he was in a state of a shota patam min ha-mitzvahs. So the Gemara says, and the Rambam codifies it, he has to eat a kazayas matzah because the mitzvah he did during the state of exemption doesn't count. Because in this Gemara, it looks like if you do a mitzvah during the state of exemption, it doesn't count. We're not mitzdaref for later on. So based on this Gemara, it would appear then that's it. A katan can't count with the bracha because his counting beforehand wasn't worth anything. On the other hand, we have a famous Gemara in Yevamos. The Gemara in Yevamos, a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, a ger she'niskayer, someone who converts to Judaism, and he has children. So it's a further discussion in the Rishonim Achronim whether the kids convert or not. Also, let's assume the kids converted. So he had, let's say, it was a non-Jewish family, father, mother, and a boy, a sister, and a brother. So, and then they converted to Judaism. So the shaila is, does he have to have another boy and a girl now? Because when he had the boy and a girl, a guy is pater mipru rabu. It's a discussion maybe kodem an Torah beforehand, but clearly now the mitzvah pru rabu applies only to Jews. Maybe the mitzvah Shevis might apply to Goyim also, but the mitzvah pru rabu is limited to Jews. So the Gemara has a shaila: does the kid that he had when he was a guy? So it's a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says no. He has, Gershon and Skaya Kakatis. You know what I mean? But we passing like Rabbi Yochanan that yes, whatever the lemdus is, he can fulfill his mitzvah of Pru Rabu. So what do we see from this Gemara? In this Gemara we see a mitzvah done during the state of exemption does kind of guy's pater in Pru Rabu, yet when he becomes a Jew later on, it works. So we have an apparent contradiction. In the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, we see an act done during the state of exemption cannot be Mistara later on. He has to eat a new Kazayas Matzah. I can't say the Kazayas Matzah he ate when he was insane during 8 and 9 counts for the later on. On the other hand, we see from the Gemara in Yevamos that a guy doesn't have to have more children. He fulfills his mitzvah pru revu, even though a guy is clearly pater b'mitzvah pru revu. So how we reconcile this apparent contradiction will help us with our question of Sfira. So the famous answer of the Minchas Chinuch, he discusses the whole issue of pru revu in Siman Aleph, Halacha Aleph. So he points out there's a famous discussion on what is the nature of the mitzvah of pru revu. He discusses, he quotes from the Yerushalmi, the Ramah, can you be yotze the mitzvah of pru revu with the mamzer? And he's not even talking about mamzer beheter. He's talking about mamzer b'yisuk. The Gemara, they talk about mitzvah haba ba'avera. So that's what the whole Minchas Chinuch over there is discussing in Siman Aleph, whether the machokas over there, why don't we say mitzvah haba ba'avera? Because I think the Ramah goes with the Yerushalmi. He's not recommending it, but if one has a boy from his wife and he has a girl from his other married woman he's fooling around with, so then he gets the mitzvah pru revu. He needs a lot of tshuva, but he still gets the mitzvah pru revu. So the question is why mitzvah haba ba'avera? What kind of adultery? How could he get the mitzvah pru? How could he get the mitzvah pru revu? So that's what the Minchas Chinuch goes into. That the question is, what is the nature of the mitzvah of pru revu? It seems Tosas in Baba Basra seems to say it's the Maisa Bia. It's the act of trying to have kids. Like the Gemara says in Shabbos, one of the three questions you're going to be asked, and based in Shamala, or you osek in pru revu. I mean osek, because that's one thing that's out of my control. I can't control whether I have the kids. I only control trying to have the kids. So many, so from Tosas and Baba Basra, a whole discussion over there, Asi do chalos ase, but the mitzvah seems to be that it's the Maisa Bia is the mitzvah. On the other hand, the Minchas Chinuch claims it's the result. It's not the Maisa of having kids, it's not that Maisa Bia, that's the mitzvah, it's the result, it's result oriented. That's why the Gemara talks about someone who has kids and then they die before him, he has to have new kids, he has to have more kids. In other words, part of the mitzvah of pru revu is your kids have to outlast you. So he has different rayas. It seems to be a machokas, Ramosha, Minchas Chinuch, and others, but he writes, Minchas Chinuch Shita is the mitzvah of pru revu is result oriented. And therefore, he says like this, he says, when do we say the klal of mitzvah haba ba'avera? If at the time I'm doing the mitzvah, I'm involved in the avera. So if the mitzvah is the Maisa Bia, so now we see that I'm involved, then we could discuss that mitzvah haba ba'avera, then you're committing adultery. Then that's that shita. But he paskins the mitzvah, that's what the Ramah, he seems to say, paskins, that the mitzvah of pru revu is the result. So it's true I committed adultery, but I did that 9 months ago. It has nothing to do with me having the kids. Like for instance, let's say I steal matzah and I use it for my Leil Seder. Do I get my mitzvah? So no, because it's like lulav agazo. It's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. So it's a matzah gzula. You need some even say you need lachem, but even if it's not lachem, it's mitzvah haba ba'avera. So it's a no-go, a matzah gzula. So it's not worth it. You might as well not steal it because you just say going from the pan to the fire. You're not getting the mitzvah anyway. You're just getting another avera. So sheve al tatza adaf. So for matzah gazoo is a no-go, but Rabbi Yeshua, and let's say the first night of Pesach is Friday night, and there's no Erev in town, and I carry my matzah from my house to someone else's house where I'm eating the Seder. I'm Machal Shabbos. Let's assume it's the Rishus HaRabim, the whole works. And I carry my matzahs, and Behidura, I have the good shmura matzah, I have all the hidurim. In fact, maybe I got the chassidish matzah that was baked there at Pesach after chatzos. The whole works. And I eat that matzah li'al Pesach. Do I get my mitzvah now? So the mitzvah chinuch says yes. So how come, what's the difference? How come when it comes to matzah gezula, we say mitzvah ba'avera? When it comes to being mechal Shabbos, it's not mitzvah ba'avera. So the answer is because b'shas I'm eating a matzah gezula, the matzah is screaming out, I'm stolen, don't eat me. So I'm involved in the mitzvah, I'm involved in the avera. Masha'en came, the avera I did was before. I carried on Shabbos. I shouldn't do it, I need tshuva on it. But the matzah didn't do anything wrong. There's no issue for the matzah to be carried. So when I ate the matzah later on, I got the kiyum mitzvah. That's the yesod of the minchas china. When it comes to the mitzvah pru revu, that's result oriented. So he says that's the pshat. How do we reckon? When it comes to the mitzvah of matzah, so when I eat the matzah between 8 and 9 when I'm a shota, it doesn't count between 9 and 10 because what's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is the achilas matzah. Calls when I'm chewing and swallowing the matzah, that's the mitzvah. Once I swallow the matzah, the mitzvah is over. I mean, I might be sick for a couple hours after, but it doesn't have to do with the mitzvah. The mitzvah is done with. Therefore, when I wake up out of my insanity at 9 o'clock, I have nothing left to show for it, because the mitzvah is the ma'isa mitzvah, so it's gone. So therefore, I have to eat a new piece of matzah. Masha'inka, when it comes to pru revu, it's a result. As long as I have a boy and a girl now, so therefore, I'm yotze. So based on this minchas chinuch, it would come out then, if we want to connect it to a katan shehigdal with a sphira. So sphira, well, that's part of the discussion, but so if you assume sphira, it's the ma'isa mitzvah of counting pashtus, it's the ma'isa, so then according to the minchas chinuch, then it would be a no-go. Because you can't do, because you have nothing to show for it when you become bar mitzvah on day 22. If you discuss that maybe it's the result, you're counting in order that there should be a shvuas in that, so then we could discuss it. But the pashtus, based on the minchas chinuch, we assume sphere is the ma'isa mitzvah, so then it's a no-go. The katan will, of course, a katan is obligated to count, but without a bracha. However, the Turi Even has a different shot. The Turi Even says, what's the difference between the case of Rosh Hashanah by the matzah and the case of Yevamos with the Pru Revu? He says, we have a klal, we know mitzvah strichas kavana. Well, it's a machokas in the Gemara, whether mitzvah strichas kavana or not. So it's a steer in the Rambam. The Rambam, right, apparent contradiction in the Rambam. The Rambam writes in Hilchas Matzah, Kafai v'achol matzah yotze, you can get, even though some of it's a gunsy and force you to eat the matzah, you can get the mitzvah li'al Pesach. However, he says by shofar you need kavanah. It's the whole discussion. What's the sheet of the Rambam on that? But the machokas in the Gemara, whether mitzvah strichas kavanah. What do you mean? There are opinions that say mitzvahs don't need kavanah. I'm about to put on my tefillin, I shouldn't have kavanah? No, of course not. It's a post facto machokas. Of course, before you do the mitzvah, you have to have kavanah. The question is post facto. So what's the bottom line psak? So the Magen Avraham from the Radbaz, we go with a compromise. On a mitzvah min Torah, we say mitzvah strichas kavanah. In other words, what we're saying is post facto. If you do a mitzvah without the requisite kavanah, you have to go back and do the mitzvah again. By a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, if you do the mitzvah without the requisite kavanah, you continue. In fact, that's what we mentioned. Or if we didn't mention, that's the pshat in the Machaber. In other words, is this urban legend or is it a reality that people say yesterday was day 23? Yesterday, just tell me what today is. I don't care if you're asking me a question. I'm telling you, I don't have a mind to fulfill my mitzvah, but that's the nakuda. If you hold Sfiras Omer is deraisa today, because you're right. You could tell your friend all day what the day is. It's a gold mile of Omer. Who cares? I don't have kavanah. But if it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and that's what the Ramah, the Machaber, quotes this halacha. So he's being machmir that it's D'Rabbanan. So we go by a mitzvah D'Rabbanan, we say mitzvahs don't require kavanah. So we have a concept of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, mitzvah ain't tzrichas, and then mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavanah. And then there's a concept of Tosfos talks about in brachas, and it's about negative kavanah that you don't have in mind. But there's something even different. It's called misasek. It's even more than not having kavanah. Like you don't even know what's going on. Like you're kind of like it's the whole discussion. The Chazon Ish, Rav Chaim, Shalim, the Rambam, and Hilchas Tefillah. The Rambam seems to write in Perek Dalet and Perek Yud. One he seems to say that only bracha rishona needs kavanah, but then in another place he says the whole Shmona Esrei needs kavanah. It's the whole famous Rav Chaim that depending the Omer lefnei hashchina you need all the time, but the Perish Amilim that you need for bracha rishona. The Chazon Ish has a whole discussion on that, but the point being is that he writes by Shmona Esrei the type of kavanah. So Rav Chaim has a strong definition. In other words, if a person's in the middle of davening, but they think they're playing football now, or they think they're on the video games, then you're not yotze. In other words, misasek is even if you paskin mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah, but you got to be aware what's going on. So that comes along the Turi Even. He says that's the pshat here. He says when it comes to a case of a shota, he doesn't have any kavanah. He doesn't know what's going on. So therefore, we say he has to eat another piece of matzah at 9 o'clock when he becomes sane, because he's totally misasek. However, Masha Ein Kain, in the case of the Gebar and Yevamas, it's true a guy's not chayev in Pru Revu, but the assumption being even when two Gentiles, husband and wife, live together, they know what they're doing, they plan on having children, they know what they're doing, they have kavanah. So that's what the Turi Even says, that the difference is in the case of the matzah, the shota, you don't even have, it's bichlal, it's a misasek. So therefore that's why it's a no-go. But by the case of Pru Revu, it's true they don't have kavanah to do, they don't need the kavanah, as long as they are aware it's enough. So according to that, so the katan knows what's going on, and obviously we're talking about a katan who's 12 and a half, 12 and 3/4. So according to the Turi Even, it would come out then a katan can continue counting with the bracha. So that seems to be it's a machlokes among the achronim on whether a katan shehigdio can he continue counting with the bracha. Of Chacham Avadja Yosef, he goes with Safek brachas lahakel, and in general, the Machaber is very strict on brachas because he holds making a bracha when you're not supposed to. He learns pshat in the Rambam, it's an issa deraisa. That's why mitzvah say shazman grama. So in general, the Machaber. So Avadja Yosef seems to be working with that, and therefore he says Safek brachas lahakel. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, I think Rav Shlomo Zalman, others, we assume like the general psak of Ashkenaz is, and it's not an uncommon case because it should happen quite often. The accepted minhag, as far as I know, seems to be that most katanim don't even know it's an issue. But those who know it's an issue and that, but the minhag is that we assume that one can continue counting with the bracha, which, whatever the lemdus is, we go where katan can continue counting with the bracha. So we'll continue our discussion on Sviras HaOmer. So there's a famous discussion in the poskim regarding an onain. What's an onain? An onain is someone who lost a relative that he has to be misavel over, one of his close relatives, and it's after the death, before the burial. So obviously the person who died, Meisim Chavshim and Mitzvahs, we're not concerned about him counting Sfira. But the one who's alive is in the status of an onain. Why? What's the issue with an onain? So in general, the Mishnah tells us in the third parak of Brachas, Misha Meisa Mutu Lafanov, that when a person's an onain, he's pater min mitzvahs. He's exempt from doing mitzvahs. So it's a machlokas Rashi and Tosas. Why is he exempt? Rashi says because you're involved with taking care of the kvura. How could you not be able to focus on the mitzvah? And therefore, because it's here the mitzvah, you're exempt. Tosas writes close to Yerushalmi, no. It's not because of that, it's because of another reason. It's because of kavod ames, that it's lo egorash, it's not honor to the dead. You can't do mitzvahs. The dead can't do mitzvahs, and you can, so therefore we don't do mitzvahs. Like you don't like where you sit this out in the cemetery, different things like that. So it's a machlokas Rashi and Tosas, whether it's what's the reason? My nafka, what's the difference between Rashi and Tosas? What's the difference in their reasoning? According to Rashi, is because you won't be able to concentrate on the mitzvah. But if a person feels they can transcend the situation and do it, so then according to Rashi, so maybe then you can do it. It's not usher to, it's you're exempt. According to Tosas, it's usher to. So how do we paskin? Like Rashi or Tosas. So we paskin like Tosas, it's usher. Not only are you exempt from the mitzvah, it's also for you to do mitzvahs. So when you're an onein, you can't do mitzvahs. And in fact, that's why it's a discussion. Let's say, what does an onein do? Well, let me just point out, an onein is only pater from positive mitzvahs, but they can't do negative commandments. So they can't go to McDonald's and have a Big Mac, or go to Tony Romo's and have the ribs, or whatever. So he's pater from mitzvahs aseh, but not from los aseh. So therefore, the question is, what happens if an onein gets hungry and he wants to eat? So what's the problem? Eat. You don't make a bracha. So the question is, you want to have bread. So there's a mitzvah midrabanan to wash your hands before you eat bread. There's also an issur drabanan to eat bread without washing your hands. So therefore, he's stuck. So what should he do? So the Piskei Tshuva writes, he should wash his hands without a bracha. Why? Regarding the mitzvah, he's exempt from, so that's out of the picture. Then the only reason he's washing his hands is to prevent the prohibition. So anytime you do something to prevent an issur, you don't make a bracha. Similarly, like the Minchas Chinuch writes by Sukkos, that let's say you're an onein over Sukkos. Let's say someone dies on Chol Hamoed. So you're going to have the burial on Chol Hamoed, but it hasn't happened yet. Now you want to eat. Do I have to eat in the sukkah or not? Or can I eat in the sukkah? On one hand, there's a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah. And according to others, there's an issur to eat outside the sukkah. So what do I do? So the Minchas Chinuch writes, you eat in the sukkah without a bracha. Why no bracha? But anytime you're doing something to avoid an issur, you don't make a bracha. So the only reason I'm sitting in the sukkah is not because I'm not getting any mitzvah, I'm doing it to avoid the issur. Similar like the Rush writes in Chulin. We're familiar with Mayim Rishonim, we wash our hands before eating bread. And there's Mayim Achronim, or for some people, but at least you know it exists. But there's Mayim Achronim. People wash their hands at the end of the meal, whatever the Melech Sodom is, whatever the reason. And everyone makes a bracha on the first Mayim Rishonim. And Mayim Achronim, we don't make a bracha today. There was some shitas you do. No one makes a bracha. Assuming you do it, you definitely don't make a bracha. So what's Mayim Emsam? I'm in the middle waters. I didn't know about middle waters. I'm familiar with beginning waters and end water. Mayim Rishonim I'm familiar with, and Mayim Achronim I'm not familiar with middle waters. What does that mean? That's what the Rush writes. Well, middle waters we're talking about when a person's going to have fish in the beginning of the meal and then meat, so you wash your hands. You wash out your mouth, you have something, but you wash it while you're washing your hands. You're washing your hands because to avoid sakana, because we have a tradition we don't have fish and meat together. So since the only reason you're washing your hands is to separate the fish and meat, so there's no bracha, because you're just doing it to avoid the issur. In fact, that's where the minhag, one pshat, on where l'chaim came from, because they used to have, in between the fish and meat, to have a l'chaim, some schnapps. So therefore you're saying, l'chaim, see, I'm breaking between fish and meat. I'm going to live. as opposed to those who eat fish and meat together, they're putting themselves in danger. So either way, so the middle waters of the Mayim Emsam. So you don't make a bracha if you're avoiding a prohibition. So an onein, we says, he has a mitzvah, he's exempt from mitzvahs, but he can't do aveira. So where does so Pashas Sfiras Omer is only a mitzvah. There's no aveira, and therefore the Pashas you would say. So obviously, let me just point out, if he's an onein if you're not an onein in a 24-hour period, so it's not an issue. If you do the burial during the next day, so then obviously everyone agrees. Then you don't count when you're an onein. You wait till after the period's over, because with the general rule is if you forget to count at night, you count during the day. If you miss a full 24 hour, then you don't make a bracha. So obviously if someone becomes an onein, and then he has the kfura, so we're talking about someone who's going to be an onein the whole time. They're not having the burial for 2 days, whatever the case may be. So therefore, what do you do? So Pashas people say, well, onein can't count, because he can't do any, he's patur min ha-mitzvahs. So the no the Yehuda of Soloveitchik, they say no, and only could count without a bracha. What's pshat count without a bracha? Because why is he counting? He's not counting to fulfill the mitzvah. In fact, that's the whole discussion, whether counting during the day at all, you're getting the mitzvah. Meaning, according to some Rishonim, there is no mitzvah. The mitzvah has to be done at night. So according to those opinions, we do a compromise, since it's a machokas whether you can count during the day or not, so we count without a bracha. But some point out that even if you assume there's no mitzvah at night, so it's based on the shittas of the Bahag. That the Bahag shittas, if you miss a complete day, it's over. So people learn the pshat in the Bahag, it's one big mitzvah, that's why. And if salvation says, no, it's not the pshat in the Bahag. It's not that it's one big mitzvah. Even the Bahag agrees it's 49 separate mitzvahs. If it's 49 separate mitzvahs, so how come I can't continue counting if I miss? It's a separate halach, it's a counting season. You need a ritzifus. To be a count means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 3, 8, 12, 14 is not a count by definition. So that's the pshat. You need a count, but so once you mess up the count, so you don't have ritzifus anymore. That's what about, but not that. So therefore, the Rav says, so an oni should count during the day, not to get a mitzvah. He's not going to get the mitzvah. He's only counting to keep his count going, because that's a discussion. Some poskim say an oni is only patur min ha-mitzvahs, or because mitzvahs are only applied b'shas aninas. But this mitzvah started before aninas, and it's continuing afterwards. So therefore, it's a machokas among the poskim. Again, everyone agrees if the aninas is over in the afternoon, you do it. But I think there's a discussion among the poskim. I think that most poskim assume an onein should count without a bracha, and then he can continue counting with a bracha the following night, and the only reason he's counting is not to get the mitzvah, but to keep the ritzifa, to keep the count going. The Torah tells us, "Uspartem lachem mimacharas haShabbos miyom aviachem es Omer hatznufa." We're going to read this week that there's a mitzvah of counting Sfiras Omer, the days in between Pesach and Shavuos. In fact, the Ramban on this week's parasha, famous Ramban. You're all familiar with Pesach and Chol Hamoed Pesach. Some people weren't so happy with the Chol Hamoed because there wasn't enough Chol. It fell out on Shabbos. But you're familiar with, I think next year it's the same way, someone told me. Chol Hamoed, more, we get to gain another 5 pounds next year then. So Chol Hamoed Pesach, Chol Hamoed Sukkot. So we're familiar with Chol Hamoed, but the Ramban says the period in between Pesach and Shavuos, that's also Chol Hamoed. It's the intermediate days. It's bridging the gap between Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. The whole tachlis of Yetzias Mitzrayim was for Matan Torah. Even when we say in the Haggadah Dayenu, I know a lot of people who are very happy with Dayenu. If He took us out of Mitzrayim and they give us the Torah, but that's not what it means. I mean, Dayenu, it's enough to have Hakaras HaTov just to the exodus from Egypt, but obviously the whole purpose was to receive the Torah and Har Sinai. So it's clearly a pasuk in the Chumash, so it's clearly a mitzvah min Torah. So the question is, what about Bizman Hazeh? Bizman Hazeh, is the mitzvah retain its biblical character, or it is only a mitzvah midrabanan? So it's a major machlokas rishonim. The Rambam, Maimonides' opinion is that Sfiras Omer, even Bizman Hazeh, is doraisa, as well as the Sefer Achinuch, and Tosfos, the Baal Amor, the Ran, other rishonim say Sfiras Omer is drabanan. What is this machlokas based on? So first I'll tell you the Gemara it's based on, then I'll give you the Lumdis. So the Gemara it's based on the Gemara in Menachos. The Gemara talks about how you count Sfira Bizman Hazeh. So there's two opinions in the Gemara how we actually do the counting. So one opinion says, well, the same way. We count days and weeks. The Torah gives us a mitzvah of counting days, count weeks. There's no difference in Bizman Hazeh the way they counted when the Beis HaMikdash was up. And the other opinion says, no, Bizman Hazeh we only count days and not weeks, because it's Zeichel HaMikdash. Today it's only a mitzvah midrabanan. It's only remembering about the good old days. So it's a major machlokas. We talk about how do you learn the Gemara. So apparently the Rambam learns the Gemara. That is good for the machlokas. The first opinion that says you count days and weeks because it's daraisa, and the opinion that says you count only days, all you need is a zecher, so it's enough to remember Sfira by counting days. I don't have to go through the whole day and weeks. That's how some want to learn, but others, Rashi, remember over Rishonim saying no, everyone agrees it's Durabanan. The whole machlokas in the Gemara is how much of a zecher do you need? In other words, we have a general principle, mitzvah derabanan kein daraisa tikkun. A rabbinical mitzvah is patterned after the biblical. There's no reason, even though it's only a mitzvah derabanan, I still do it the same way. And the other opinion says, no, it's true, but since it's only a zeichel of mikdash, it's not even a mitzvah derabanan, it's even lower, so it's enough just to mention days. That's based on that Gemara. You have how you learn that Gemara will determine whether you hold it's daraisa derabanan today. In Lumdis, what's the machlokas? So it seems to be, at first glance, it seems to be based on the following. The Torah gives us two mitzvahs, in the Svartam Lachem, and in the Omer Hatnufa. The Gemara talks about, the Torah talks about, in those same psukim, the Karban Omer and the Sfiras Omer. What is the connection, what is the link, if any, between the mitzvah of Sfira and the Sfiras Omer and the Karban Omer? So, if you hold Sfiras Omer as an independent mitzvah, and it's only telling me the same time the Karban Omer and the Sfira is the same time, it's only coincidental, there's no pure connection between the two. So then Sfira would be daraisa today, because we don't have a Karban Omer, we all know, but so what? The Karban Omer is telling me the Zman, it's not telling me something fundamental, and therefore Sfira is a mitzvah min Torah today. And the other opinion seems to be the Bali Tosfos that Sfiras Omer is connected to the Karban Omer, and therefore that since we don't have a Karban Omer today, so therefore Sfira would be Durabanan. That seems to be the Pashtus, that whether Sfira is Daraisa Durabanan, whether it's totally on the Karban Omer. If it's connected to the Karban Omer, there is no Karban Omer, it's only Durabanan. If it's independent, it's Daraisa. And with this, there's even a third Shita. How could you have a third Shita? What's left? So Rabbeinu Yerucham, that he wants to make a distinction between, so the Rambam, the Sefer Achinuch versus Tosfos, the Ran, the Baal Amor, they go categorically, everything's daraisa, everything's drabanan. The Rambam says days and weeks are daraisa, Tosfos says days and weeks are drabanan. Rabbeinu Yerucham has a different shita. He writes, Bizman Beis HaMikdash Kayam, he writes, you used to make two brachas even. You made a separate bracha on the days, a separate bracha on the weeks. He says, Bizman Hazeh, that days retain its biblical character, so therefore that retains its bracha, but counting weeks is only a zeichel mikdash, and that gets into a separate discussion. Sometimes you make a bracha on zeichel mikdash, sometimes you don't, so he's holding, that's what we say, Arachamonu Yachzu Lanu Avodas Beis HaMikdash V'Mkoma, that we want to bring back the glory days of the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore he says, so what's the lumdus? He says, if you look at the psukim, the weeks are connected to the karban, but the days aren't. So you have three shitas, all this with the same lump is whether if it's connected to the carbon, it's D'Rabbanan. So based on Rabbeinu Yerucham, that's the way the Svardim count. I don't mean Nusach Svard, but the real Svardim. Any real Svardim in the room? So how do they count? So basically, we count. I'll say today is the 12th day for argument's sake. I won't even get close. Hayom, did we say Shteimer? So Yom today is the 12th day, which is 1 week and 5 days of Omer. What they do is today is the 12th day Omer. Right. Well, Omer, we'll get to that in a second. Which is a week and 5. So why do they break up Omers? So Tzvi Pesach Frank in the Migroi Kodesh points out the Choshesh Vashitas Rabbeinu Yerucham that Bisman Hazeh Sfiras Hayamim is Daraisa, Sfiras counting the weeks is D'Rabbanan. You want to make a clear demarcation between the mitzvah min HaTorah and the mitzvah midrabanan, so therefore they break it up. Where is there precedent for this? That in the same mitzvah, which is Daraisa D'Rabbanan, you have a clear demarcation between the two. So that's what we do. Well, we can do it daily. We can do it a couple of times a day, or maybe we just wait for Shabbos to do it. But Birkas HaMazon, the Gemara tells us in Brachas that Moshe instituted the first bracha Hazon HaZakol, Yoshua, Eretz Yisrael, David and Shlomo Beis HaMikdash, and those three are Daraisa, and of course the Nusach isn't, but the concept is, and the fourth one, Harugi Beitar, that's the Rabbanan. So how do we end the third bracha? Something strange. Bon Bracha B'Yushalayim, Amen. Since when do we enter Amen to our own bracha? So the Rishonim say we want to show it's the end of the unit. So if Ad Kad Mitzvah Daraisa, now we're beginning in Nafkamina, not so much today, but when you were Pola, the Gemara talks about, that you stop benching there and you get back to work. I guess today no one works anyway, so it's not really an issue. I guess maybe they've used the bench longer because I don't see the Nafkamina, an extra 5 seconds that much, but I guess maybe they daven longer. But either way, there are some Nafkamina, Lamaisa, but in theory. So that's what the Tzvi Pesach Frank says. They say Omer to break up the Daraisa D'Rabbanan, and they have really. So it doesn't make a difference. We paskin, we do Omer at the end, but Lamaisa, let's say we don't say Omer at all. So everyone agrees it's only a din l'chatzchila. If you say Omer and not the day, you're in trouble. But if you count the day and you left out Omer, so it's no problem. So it's only a machlokas on a l'chatzchila level where you put Omer. And in fact, some say Omer, some say Ba'omer. What's that all about? Omer. But in fact, with salvation was known to say both. So the different reasons given, but some say it's totally on this issue on whether Sfiras Omer is Daraisa D'Rabbanan. In other words, if you're saying is Ba'omer, so you're saying it's connected to the time of Sfira. Omer specifically to the carbon. So therefore, if you hold it's D'Rabbanan, which seems to be the pashas of Rova Poskim, and most Poskim also say Omer. So therefore they say Omer. Ba'omer is mashmo more bin HaTorah. I guess the Rav, the Briskus had many chumras, but either he used to say, I know some people I heard say, they say Omer and Ba'omer, just the words back to back. Others I heard that the Rav didn't do that. He said the whole thing out, and then he said Omer and Ba'omer again. He had other chumras, I think in Ashrei, he used to Zecher Rav Tuvcha, Zecher, different briska chumras on terms of what he used to repeat, different words. So either way, some say Omer, Ba'omer is also connected to this issue, the right to D'Rabbanan. So based on Rabbeinu Yerucham, that's why the Sfardim break it up. Based on this as well, the Beis HaLevi had a kula lahalacha, because let's say you forget. So the general halacha is, again, we'll see if we'll get into the Bahagla now, but the bottom line halacha is if you forget to say tonight, so tomorrow you count without a bracha, then you can continue counting the following nights with the bracha. You don't make a bracha during the day, because Pashas, it's a machokas, we show them whether you're allowed to count during the day at all. So Sabbath brachas l'haka, we count without a bracha. If you miss a full 24-hour, so then the minig is you continue counting, but without a bracha. Not that you have a choice, you chayev to. You have to count, but you have to count without a bracha. So in fact, that's why Soloveitchik was always. So I guess, let me say the Beis HaLevi. For the Beis HaLevi, so the minig is, let's say if I forget day 5, so I can't do day 6 with a bracha. I have to count. But the Beit Levi said when you get to day 7, 14, 21, etc., at the end of the week, so then you can make a bracha. He went l'kula based on Rabbeinu Yerucham that it's separate mitzvahs. So then even though you messed up the days, you can still count the weeks. The Rabbi even took it further of Selevan. He really felt that if you miss any day, a full 24, you can really make a bracha. In other words, really, he points out that the Torah tells us Tamimas Tiyena. So if everyone knows the Bahag, that if you miss one day, that's it, you can no longer count anymore. But that's a chiddush. That's not what Tamimas means. The simple reading of the Chumash, Tamimas means is that certain mitzvahs we begin, let's say, shaking the Daled Minim. We begin in the morning. Tamimas means, you have to count at night. So Tamimas means you count at the beginning of the night. That's what the pasuk means. That's what it really means. No one knows that. People think Tamimas means they just know the Bahag. It means you need a complete count. That's not the pshuto. It's a big chiddush of the Bahag. It's not even clear the Bahag says it. We'll get to. But that's what everyone says. The Bahag is one big mitzvah as opposed to 49. So Rav Soloveitchik always points out. Number one is Rov Rishonim hold it's 49 separate mitzvahs. And we'll see, he's not even sure the Bahag holds that way, but even if he did, he's a Das Yachid, he's a minority of you anyway. So the Mechaber in general, he's always machmir on brachas, suffered brachas, because he goes with the Shitas HaRambam. If you say a bracha, but you don't have to, perhaps you're dealing with the Daraisa. Other Rishonim say it's only perhaps a Din D'Rabbanan you're over. So that's why Mitzvah Hasei Shezman Grama, so this Mechaber in general is overly strict when it comes to, so the Mechaber is saying, let me be choshesh v'shitas habahag, so I'll tell you to count without a bracha. But the Rav saying, really, Me'ikar Adin, you chayav to count every day, and really, according to Rov Rishonim, if not more than Rov, you should be making a bracha. Okay, so we follow the Mechaber, we don't make the bracha, because it's not likula anyway. So he says like this, if someone comes to you and says, I missed a complete day, what should I do? Okay, count but without a bracha. Oh, so he understands the code. Count without a bracha. Oh, it doesn't really count. It's over and then he stops counting. Like the Rabbi used to say, the famous Gemara in Sukkah, that the Gemara in Eretz Yisrael is not an issue. In Eretz Yisrael it's not an issue. You don't have to eat in the Sukkah in Shemini Atzeres. But in Chutz La'aretz, that's a discussion. The Gemara has a discussion. So the Gemara has different sheets. The Gemara concludes, Yasvei Yasvinan Bruchig Omer Barchinan. That you sit in the sukkah without a bracha. I'm not getting into the different minhagim what you do with Maisa, but that's the clear psak of the Gemara in Shulchan Aruch. You sit in the sukkah without a bracha. So what does the Rebbe always say? You tell someone, well, you sit in the sukkah, Shmi, don't make a bracha. They end up inside. There's not really a mitzvah. So you have to know your balabatim, he always used to say. If you're going to tell someone to count without a bracha, and that to mean to him, I'm not counting that for sure. Much better to count with the bracha every night of Sfir, you even missed 4 nights, because he definitely has a chiyuv to count. That's not up for discussion. If you know the person, because really, the Mechaber, we go with the Mechaber, he's choshesh, but really Me'ikar Adin, you don't have to be, and we have many kulas by Sfir. He thought you could make a bracha every night. Again, a Ben Torah knows if you tell them, count without a bracha, that's our minute. We just count without a bracha, but to tell someone to try to explain what the bracha, so then just tell him he could even, the Rabbi even took it further than the Beis Halevi, but the Beis Halevi is working with Rabbeinu Yerucham, that days and weeks, so he's going like that. So that's, and in fact, we're always let's say someone not sure if they count, let's say they're not sure if they counted yesterday. They come to me and say, you know what, I'm not sure if I counted yesterday. I'm not sure if I counted yesterday. So what do you do? So Pashas, you would say, well, we have a general subject Daraisa Chumra, subject Rabbanan. Would depend on this machlokas, the Rambam and the Tosas. However, everyone agrees. Even if you know this Daraisa, you still would continue counting. Because why? Because it's the post can bring down. It's a svek sveika. Subject Daraisa Chumra, subject Rabbanan Ukula, but it's svek sveika. Even on a mitzvah Daraisa, we go Ukula. So what's the svek sveika? The svek sveika is maybe I counted yesterday, maybe I didn't. And even if I did not count, but maybe it's 49 separate mitzvahs. So we go with the svek sveika. Even if you're not sure if you counted yesterday, we assume you did, and you can continue counting with the bracha. So So my nafkamina then. So we have a major machlokas. Rambam, it's all daraisa. Tosas is all darabanan. Rabbeinu Yerucha makes a distinction. But we're all meticulous. We're all Orthodox Jews, and we're meticulous in mitzvahs darabanan just as well as mitzvahs min Torah. So besides the fact whether when I'm going to count sphere in the next couple of minutes, besides the obvious difference when I'm getting a mitzvah min Torah now or mitzvah midron, is there any practical difference between whether I hold this daraisa darabanan? So perhaps right now would be probably in Ben Hashmashas at this point, maybe getting close to pass, but let's assume it's Ben Hashmashas now. So what about counting during Ben Hashmashas? Can I count Ben Hashmashas up until sunset is considered Vadayom. It's definitely day until sunset. The time period between sunset and 3 stars, that's Safek Yom, Safek Laila. So the question is, what can I count Sfira during this Ben Hashmashas time? So it should depend on our issue. According to the Rabbi...
Can I take it back a minute? Svek Sveka, so Safek Brachos L'Kula, we always know that the rule is you don't say the bracha.
Right.
Svek Sveka, if you're saying Svek Sveka, how do you know that the L'Kula means not to say the bracha?
Then how do I know that you do make the bracha? Because how do I know that you mean you can make the bracha?
Well, how do you know which way is L'Kula? To say the bracha or not to say the bracha?
Oh, you're saying...
The only reason we say normally Safek Brachos L'Kula is that's the rule. But if you're not using that rule, if you're using a Svek Sveka, which way is the Kula? To say the bracha or not to say the bracha?
Well, either way, right? Because you're saying the Kula is to say the bracha, because maybe that you should be making it,
right?
Or you could or the Kula is that we assume that you did count, and therefore, the Kula is that we're assuming that you. So that would depend on how Svek Sveka works. So what's the lum? This is Svek Sveka. What they say, or Safek Daraisa L'Chumra. In fact, I'll get to that child in a minute. Actually, with this right on this point, because it says. So according to the Rambam, it should be. I'll come back to you right now. According to the Rambam, Safek Daraisa L'Chumra. There should be nothing to talk about. I have to go count. If I counted Ben Hashmashas, it's a no-go. I have to count again tonight. According to those who say it's Darabanan, Safek Darabanan L'Kula, I'm Yotze. So that seems to be the psak in the Shulchan Aruch that definitely b'di'eved the Macharaita medaktikin wait until Laila, but even the Shulchan Aruch is modeh. You count that Ben Hashmashas Yotze. But so therefore he seems to be going with the Darabanan. So let's assume it is Darabanan. So does that mean, could I lechatchila count? Safek Darabanan L'Kula lechatchila then? That's your question. Right. The Sfas Emes asked your question. Sfas Emes says, even though it's true according to Tosas or the Ran or whoever, that you tell me it's Darabanan, but Safek Darabanan L'Kula you should be able to count, but how could you make a bracha? That's the Sfas Emes kasha, similar kasha to, the same yisod, but that's his kasha. How can we make the bracha? Safek Darabanan L'Kula. It's L'Kula I can count, but how can I make a bracha? So what's the machlokas? So this seems to be a machlokas, the Ran versus the Bali Tosas. How do you learn Safek Darabanan L'Kula? In other words, there's a famous Ran in Arvei Psachim about the Gemara talks about the mitzvah of Haseba, reclining. So Gemara talks about Matzah Sarach Haseba, Mara Ein Sarach Haseba. Matzah needs reclining Mara. It doesn't. What about wine? So the Gemara says it was said in the name of Rav Nachman. Some say, some students were sleeping, some were listening. Some said in the name of Rav Nachman he says he requires reclining, and some say he doesn't. So the Gemara says, okay, but which one? So the Gemara says no. So there's no kasha. He said Rav Nachman said you only have to recline out 2 out of the 4. But which 2 out of the 4? So we don't know. So Gemara says, okay, we don't know which 2 out of the 4. ID by Haseba. The Gemara says, let's recline on all 4. So comes along the Ran and says, what are you talking about? That the kasha is, what about Haseba is only a mitzvah midrabanan, Safek Darabanan L'Kula. Why? How could you recline and why do you recline in all 4? So the second answer to the Ran is the fundamental answer, the one he really likes, is no, why can't we say Safek Darabanan L'Kula here? Because we don't say Safek Darabanan L'Kula in a case where it could lead to a tarte desastre. In other words, let's say, if I say, when I come to the first 2 cups, Savak Darabanan L'Kula, the next 2 cups, I'll be batal the mitzvah sable agamre. We know it's definitely wrong. He definitely said you have to recline it in 2 out of the 4. So if Savak Darabanan L'Kula is going to lead me to the wrong conclusion, it's like the Beis Halevi was asked, that today we paskin that Shemitah. This is the question they asked the Beis Halevi. That we paskin today Shemitah is only D'Rabbanan. That's one. That's the Rambam. Trumas Amayis is Shemitah is D'Rabbanan. And we have another machlokas among the Rambam and the Gaonim. How do you count the Shemitah? How do you count Yovel? Is it 49, then back to 1, 49, 50? So the person asked the Beis Halevi, we shouldn't have to keep Shemitah today because it's a subject D'Rabbanan L'Kula. So the Beis Halevi said, obviously you didn't learn the Ran in Arvei Psachim. You can't say, everyone agrees there is a Shemitah. The question is what year? So if I said subject D'Rabbanan L'Kula, I'll be Maval to the mitzvah Shemitah. So we don't say subject D'Rabbanan, that's the famous answer to Ran, that's the one he likes. But the one relevant to us is the first answer. He says, Ein Achinami, really subject D'Rabbanan L'Kula, if you picked any 2 out of the 4, or if you didn't recline on any, you'd be okay. The Ikra din, you'd be Yotzei. But what's the Pshat? It's a milsa, it's not a tirka, it's no big deal. So I'll drink the wine, I'll move a little over. So the Ran has a klala. We don't say Savak D'Rabbanan L'Kula if it's not a big deal. If it's easy to be strict on it, so he says don't rely on, the Mishnah Berurah loves that Ran and he quotes it for everything. So what is the Ran learning? Savak D'Rabbanan L'Kula is only a b'diavad halacha. In other words, you don't rely on Savak D'Rabbanan. B'diavad, it's a post facto b'diavad halacha, but right now according to the Ran. So according to the Rambam, if you count the Ben Hashmashas, it's meaningless. You have to count again. But according to the Ran, right now it's Ben Hashmashas. Better not to count. Wait until Laila because Savak D'Rabbanan L'Kula, and therefore, and the issue with the bracha, then also he has a. So however, Tosfos disagrees and says Tosfos writes, no, the Tosfos seems to write based on Tamimas, L'chadchila, you should count Ben Hashmashas. You want to make it a complete Tamimas, and therefore the earlier the better. So it seems to be a fundamental machlokas, Tosfos versus the Ran, whether Savak D'Rabbanan L'Kula is a din l'chadchila. No, you should. Don't wait. You're messing up. The more you wait, it's lacking to me. So it's a machlokas Tosfos in the Ran. Should I count during Ben Hashmashas or not? So what's in the kudas machlokas? So the issue gets down to how do you understand when I say Savak D'Oraisa L'Chumra, Savak D'Rabbanan L'Kula, Sveika, how's it working? I'll give a mashal. Let's say you go to a supermarket and you see 50% off sale. It says kosher meat 50% off. So great, you go to the you go to the back and you see 50%, and you look closely. Or people say it's Hebrew, kind of like on the egg matzah. They tell you not to eat it, but it's in Hebrew. People think you give it to hashgacha, so they have it in Hebrew. And maybe we're not sure. It's Savak D'Oraisa this meat. That's why it's 50. We're not sure it got mixed up with the other meat. So that's why so the guy, he comes back, he just had a big workout, he was working out in the gym, or he's playing ball, he's feeling hungry, he's feeling lucky, okay, what the heck, Suffolk, the Suffolk, then he takes out the meat, the Miami ribs, the rack ribs, what do they call them, the back beef ribs, whatever they are, and he takes out the barbecue, the honey, goes to the whole works, and he has the best meal ever. Then a couple of minutes later, he starts feeling guilty. Well, maybe I shouldn't have had this meat. And he's worrying about it for the rest of his life. Adveya the Estrim, and after 120 years, he finally goes up and he sees the Malach. He says, "I've been dying to find out. I got to know on that date when just tell me was the meat kosher or not." He says, "Your lucky day, pal. It was kosher." Now he feels great again. Okay, then he goes into the basin Shamala. I guess he has a picture of the scales working. And then God takes that piece of meat and puts it on the Avera side. He says, "No, God, no, I spoke to the Malach. You just put it on the wrong side. It was no, he says, you don't get it. Because when you say Savak D'Oraisa L'Chumra, it's true, it might have been the Suffolk, might have started off as the Suffolk. But once we pass in Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra, that's the Torah's Vada. It's not a Safek, it's the halachic reality. It's similarly, Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula, if the meat was actually non-kosher D'Rabbanan, but the halacha is to eat it, it's 100% kosher. There's no tshuva on it. It's a halachic reality. So Svek Sveika also, it's the same Shiloh. That's the Shiloh. So when you say Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra, do you say it's B'Torah's Vadai or B'Torah's Safek? Same thing with Svek Sveika. Do I say like it's 33%, 6, so now it's so that depends. That seems to be a Machlokas Shach and Ramah in Yoreh De'ah regarding not the chicken wings, but when the wings of the chicken break. So they point out. So that's the Shei Shmaitza talks about it, and Shara Yosher. So they discuss how it works. So that seems to be the Machlokas here, Tosas versus the Ran. If you hold Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula is B'Torah's Vadai, then that's what Tosas is saying. Okay, that's halacha. Chazal are telling me Safek D'Rabbanan. They're telling me that's how I should act. Hence, even with the bracha, that's the Sfat Emes Kasha. How can you make a bracha? It's not a Safek. It started off as a Safek. But Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula is B'Torah's Vadai. Hence, Tosas said to make a bracha and l'chatchila counts. The Ran is learning Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula is B'Torah's Safek. So if B'Torah's Safek, why should I take a chance? Therefore, better to wait until night. Then that's the same issue by Svek Sveika as well. The Machlokas seems to be a Machlokas Ramah and Shach. Whether you because it gets into if I can be do I have to be trying to be Mavara or Svek Sveika? So that's what the Ramah seems to say no. The Shach seems to say yes. So what's the issue? Well, if Svek Sveika is B'Torah's Vada, I don't have to be Mavara or anything. The halacha dictated to me. Like I get a child, they're going to cause some milk got mixed into my chicken soup, so I get a call from the woman and saying she wants to know, so I say, of course it's kosher. Would you eat it? Yeah, of course I would eat it. No, she said, of course I threw out the chicken too. I'm not eating. I want to know about the pots. But the question is, there's a discussion in the Achronim. So let's say the Chazal tell us it's batu b'shishim. Could I be machmir and say, well, I don't want to eat the milk in the chicken soup because I want to be. So that's what. So some posts in the they say it's usher to be machmir. It's heresy. You're going against when Chazal paskin bitu b'shishim is not telling you that it's a b'di'evet. That is the halacha. That's a maval l'nitzchil l'chadchila. You can't go ahead and pour a little milk in the chicken soup. That's but that you can't do. But if it's already in there. So that's what they point. That's what they say.
Why did the Ramah paskin like the Ran? He always paskins like Tosfos, right?
In terms, and you're talking about by the.
He's saying you have to be Mavar, which means he's paskining like the Ran.
But I'm just saying. Well, I'm just tying in. By Sveika over there. I'm just tying it into the subject. I'm tying it in to Ramah here by Spheres. He's talking about Sphere D'Rabbanan. Yeah. So he's not. But he might even say, he's going like the Ran, that unless he's just being machmir out. It could be because maybe Spheres D'Oraisa Machlokas. I'm just trying to say in one that he's not actually saying. We have to work out why the Ramah by Sphere is being machmir or not.
No, he doesn't say it's like the Ran.
Right. Yes, I'm just saying that. Yeah. I'm just tying in.
Apparently.
Yeah. I'm saying
it's difficult.
No, right. No, I'm saying
it's difficult to say that.
Right, no, I'm saying is he's working. I'm saying he's working with the alumnus, whether he's actually working. I'm just using Tosas Duran as an example. So I'm saying then you have to get into maybe he goes that Sphere. He could be machmer for another reason, not because of the alumnus still works, but it could be for a different reason. You're right. We have to work that through. So they point out that Bnei Yissaschar says he takes it to the next step in the Chassidus Svarim. He writes that. So let's say you have. Well, that's the highest level, but to b'shishim. That Isser is nefach leheter. B'makom bali tshuva omnin ein. So he says, if you have milk mixing into your chicken soup, you should share it with the whole community. It's the highest level, and it's the highest level of food. But either way, but that's the point. Is we assume when the Chazal is giving us kolam, they're not choices. That's the way it works. That seems to be the issue regarding this machlokas between Tosas and the Ran. On whether you chadchila should count with the bracha, whether you're learning Safek D'Rabbanan B'Kula B'Torah's Vadai or B'Torah's Safek. So therefore, it seems to be we have three shittas. We have the Rambam who holds it's D'Oraisa and therefore certainly you have to wait until Laila. You have the Ran and Tosfos who both agree, both agree b'di'evid, if you counted it was there, but the Machlokas, the Ran and Tosfos l'chatchila, how do I learn Savik Rabban and Lakua? The Ran seems to be going, or, it could have been the Machaber, right, not the Rama anyway, that he says to wait until, the Rama might he just doesn't comment. I think it's the Machaber actually writes it, and the Rama just doesn't say anything. So, and on Medaktik, he seems to be working with the Machaber, and Tosfos with Tamimis, so that's a major nafkamina. And another one that always comes up is it this urban legend or is something too? People always say yesterday was, instead of saying just tell what today's day. Actually, that would be the real problem. Actually, during the daytime, you could tell anyone what today's day. It's only the only problem would be during Ben Hashemashah or right now. To say what tonight's day would, but normally there's no problem. So what is that? What is that all about? So the Machaber brings down not to you say yesterday was so and so. What's it all about? It's about the same issue because the Gemara tells us in many places a machlokas in the Gemara whether mitzvahs strichas kavana or not, whether mitzvahs require intent. So it's a steer in the Rambam whether mitzvahs strichas kavana and hilchas matzah. He seems to say kafa v'achol matzah. You force to eat the matzah, you yatza, implying mitzvahs ain't strichas kavana. Yet in hilchas shofar he writes that you need kavana both the person blowing the shofar and the one listening. So there's many hoshir and what's the pshat in the Rambam. But either way, the machlokas and the Rishonim. So how do we pass in halacha? We make a compromise. The Magen Avraham quotes in the Rabbi on a mitzvah and Torah, mitzvah strichas kavana. That again, what do you mean? The people say mitzvahs don't require kavana. I'm about to daven. I'm about to count svira now, so don't have kavana? Of course not. Everyone says before you do the mitzvah you should have kavana. The shaila is post facto. If I did the mitzvah without the requisite kavana, do I have to do it over again? So the mitzvah in our Torah we say yes, mitzvah strichas kavana, and it's a no-go. You have to do it over again. But a mitzvah d'Rabbanan we say no. So that's the issue. So come out, according to the Rambam who holds Svira Daraisa, I could say tonight all I want. If I'm just answering a question, if I don't have a mind to fulfill my mitzvah, and you just want to... So according to the Rambam, we're saying that that's the Daraisa turns out a kula. You can say tonight's date all you want, and it won't be, you don't have to worry about it. That'd be good for Lag BaOmer night, that's when you run into the issue a lot of times. And however, according to the Ran and Tosfos, then it'd be a problem because mitzvah ain't strichas kavana, and therefore we're choshesh for the shittas of the Machaber seems to be he seems to be working with the Drabanan because it's masha from the Machaber. Someone at the fact he says you wait until Laila, he holds it the right, but it's not. If you look at the Machaber, he even seems to only have medaktikin, so he seems to be working with the Rabbanan, and then and this works in as well that he's being choshesh for the Rabbanan. The Ramah seems to be choshesh another shita, which is the right, because normally we assume if you're in the middle of a meal, so if you on a mitzvah in our Torah you would stop. So he seems to say you should stop and do svira, even though it could be just being choshesh for the shita. But that's what they point this issue whether you're allowed to say yesterday's day, today's day. This depends on whether mitzvah strichas kavana. Whether mitzvah strichas kavana. So according to Rambam, it's not an issue, and according to Tosfos and the Ran, it would be an issue in terms of the Raisa versus Drabanan. So let's summarize. So
sorry, so you're saying the Machaber does not hold as the Raisa?
No, I think people say the Machaber. I'm saying to me, Pashas the Machaber looks like he does it, even though the Machaber usually passes like the Rambam. I'm saying people quote what they do is people ask the Kasha on the Machaber. So I don't see this. They say the Machaber says you wait until Laila. He's mashis like the Rambam, but by this halacha, so I don't see the steer anyway. But the answer would be is that because he holds the kasha is really the kasha that really ask on the Machaber is by Kriya Shema and Siman Samech. He seems to go with mitzvah strichas kavana. Yet over here he seems to be passing mitzvah. The answer, what's this no kasha? Kriya Shema is deraisa, sphere is derabanan. That's how the Miyashiv, the appearing Sphira. That's the Mechaber by Kriya Shema seems to say Mitzvah Strichas Kavana, and the Mechaber here doesn't, so that's how we reconcile Mitzvah Deraisa, Kriya Shema, but Mitzvah Derabanan Sphira. And just to point out, so that also seems to be, some point out, the Hinni Muchanu Zuman, like it seems to be, we seem to do a stira. Hinni Muchanu Zuman, Chai Mitzvah say, it seems to imply it's a mitzvah in our Torah. And at the end we say, Harachmanu Yachsu Wanu Avoda Beitz HaMikdash, which is Derabanan. That's, I guess that's the Rub, Omer, Omer. He's covering both angles. But, so in fact, we know the Noda B'Yehuda in general was against saying Hinni Muchanu Zuman. He was against the Hasidim, who he holds because Birkas HaTorah, because the Birkas HaMitzvah, that's what Chazal gave us. We don't need, so in fact there's a famous Maisa with the Noda B'Yehuda's grandson. The Noda B'Yehuda had very strong words for the Hasidim. I think they didn't hit it off. Today, a lot of the Hasidim you're mixed in, it's not the same issue today. In fact, we have a hard time understanding what they were arguing. But the Vilna Gaon, it was a different, Chadash Asim and HaTorah, you have to make, history bears it out that they're within Orthodoxy. But any new movement that comes out, we test the waters, we have to make sure. So there's a famous Maisa, the Noda B'Yehuda, so he was very upset at the Hasidim, so when he wrote in one of his Truvas, he quoted the Pasuk, Yisharim Dar, Hashem's ways are straight, U'tzadikim Yelchobam, the righteous will follow in them, U'aposhim, and the stum word is Poshimbo. So he took out the word Poshim and put Hasidim. He said, the righteous will follow it, Chasidim, Chasidim Poshimbo, the Chasidim Astam. So that's what he wrote. So the grandson of the Noda B'Yehuda, many years later, was with the sons of the Divrei Chaim. He says, we get it, we hit it off today, our grandparents didn't, but I know my grandfather had strong words, maybe I should go back and put Poshim, take out Chasidim and put it in Poshim. So he asked the Divrei Chaim, what do you think? He says, Chas v'shalom. He says, what are you talking about? Your grandfather was a great person. He took Poshim and turned them into Chasidim. You want to take Chasidim and turn them into and I think it stays in the original. So at this level of the playing field, another Hasidic story I have on the other end is the famous Ma'aser was Rav Heinemann, now the star T in Baltimore, but he learned in Lakewood with Rav Aaron Cutler. So one Saturday night in Lakewood, I guess the Satmar Rebbe came to town, maybe it was there for Shabbos, I don't know, but he had a Tish Motzoi Shabbos. So usually Rav Heinemann is learning in the Beis HaMikdash, so Rav Aaron Cutler didn't find him. So I guess, a couple of hours later, Rav Heinemann came back in the Beis HaMikdash, and so Rav Aaron Cutler called him over. He said, where were you? He said, the Satmar Rebbe was in town, so I went to the Tish. He said, okay, tell me what happened. He said, the Satmar Rebbe wasn't happy with me. Why? What did you do? Or what didn't you do? So I guess Shirayim, I guess they give over the leftovers of the fish. So they're passing around the fish with their hands, and then he got it to me, I just sent it going. And the Satmar Rebbe was looking, he looked and he got very upset. He says, you'll never be a chassid. So Rabbi Aaron Cutler said, you should be happy. You got a bracha from a tzaddik. So either way, so in fact, some point out, so the Noda B'Yehuda was against Hinni Muchanu Zuman anyway, in general. Others don't like it because it looks like Baal Tosef. If you hold Sfiras D'Rabbanan, you're making it into a mitzvah in our Torah. So if you hold like Noda B'Yehuda, you should never say Hinni Muchanu Zuman. And even if you normally do say it, but by Tzvira, at some point it's problematic because you're implying that the right and you might be over Baal Tosef. So that's why many people don't say it. In fact, I heard that that someone told me, I can't confirm this, maybe someone, the Noda B'Yehuda died during this time period. I'm not sure it's exact your type. So in one of the Hasidic yeshivas in Brooklyn, I heard, in deference to the Noda B'Yehuda, that night, they don't say Hinni Muchanu Zuman, the night of the Yortzeit of the Noda B'Yehuda. So whatever that date is. So, but either way, that's...
How did it become part of everyone's Nusach?
No, that's just because... the simple chat is because the one who made the siddur put it in. That's the only reason. That's why I'm saying you find it also in many Haggadahs, because many Haggadahs they took out from the Hasidic Haggadahs and they just copied them. There's no reason why it's in. You have it in the Pesach, Haggadah either. If you like a Chassid, like let's say I had a Chabad guy who used to daven next to me every morning. I remember after Rabbi Yitzkin Zatzal, every morning, they say of everything. So for Hasidim, but yeah, but no, I agree. No, the only reason, there's no reason. There's nothing special about Sfirat because the guy. There's no reason to say it. I mean, no special reason. It's only because it happens to be in this siddur. So let's just summarize. We discussed Sfirat Omer was clearly at one point a mitzvah min Torah. Bizman hazeh machlokas Rambam and Sefer Achinach versus Tosas Taran the Baal Mor whether Sfirat is deraisa. Today Rambam seems to say yes. And they get a chance to go into the Hor of Chaim on the Rambam. We'll have to do that another time. But the Rambam holds this because he has a whole different shot. That the Rambam holds it's connected to the carbon and it's still deraisa. But the Pashtus is the Rambam holds it's independent mitzvah, therefore it's deraisa. The other Rishonim hold it's d'Rabbanan because it's connected to the carbon Omer. That's how you learn the Gemara Menachos or Zeichel Mikdash, whether you count days or weeks or not. And we said Rabbeinu Yerucham, days deraisa, weeks d'Rabbanan. He used to make two different brachas, and that's why the Svardim they break up Omer to make a distinction between the mitzvah deraisa and mitzvah d'Rabbanan, like Birkas Hamazon. We say Bon Rak Moshav Amen. We add Kan mitzvah min Torah, the biblical mitzvah and the mitzvah d'Rabbanan. We have the Beis Halevi, who he said he forgot to count during the week. So when he got to the end of every week, he could continue counting with the bracha. And then we had Omer Ba'omer, depending on the rights of d'Rabbanan. And then we discussed within. So everyone holds if it's just not sure if you counted, so then Svek Sveka. And what about counting Ben Hashmasha? So we had three shittas. According to the Rambam, definitely no. But according to, we had a further machlokas, the Ran and the Balitosis, whether Safek Rabbanan Wakula is B'Torah, it's Vadi Torah Safek, whether L'chadchila I should count during Ben Hashmashos. The Ran seems to be waiting until Laila, and the Tosa says the Iker Tamimas is right away, and that was the whole base of late, and that's the Rabbi says we really passed in every day to separate mitzvahs. So really, everyone is chayav to count, even if you miss 48 days. And the minig is not to count with the bracha, but you have to know your balabatim, and therefore, if they're not going to count at all, better to continue even counting with the bracha, because really, to everyone except the Bahag says you can continue counting. And then we said that's the difference also whether you say, you have to say yesterday is the day. Could I answer my friend and tell them what day it is? So if it's deraisa, it's no problem. You can do it all you want. But with choshesh, it's d'Rabbanan. Therefore, we don't say we always say well yesterday's day. But that's only during Ben Hashmashas and now. During the afternoon, you can say anything you want. It's not an issue because you can't fulfill the mitzvah. You can say what tonight's date is. You don't have to say during the day. You don't have to say yesterday's day. What to say what today's date is in terms of that. I guess people just want to get used to not saying it, so a low plug. They just, or they either that or they don't know. And therefore, and there are other issues as well. We can't go into now. Nashim, other issues as well could depend on this issue whether Sfirat Omer is the right of d'Rabbanan. But as the Ramban pointed out, even though on a d'Rabbanan level, it's a time of Avelis now, Mixus Avelis, coming to a close soon. You can take haircuts on Friday this year. However, as the Ramban point, really biblically speaking, it's a happy time, as in fact, that's why that Shavuos is called an Atzeres. It's one day. What do you mean it's an Atzeres? It's the beginning at the end? But no, as the Ramban pointed out, Shavuos is the conclusion of Pesach. And on Pesach we went free, but the whole tachlis of Yetzias Mitzrayim is to receive Torah Matan Torah, and that's what the days of Sfira we're counting for. We're looking to the days of Matan Torah, and that's why these are happy days. It's a time of Kol HaMoed, bridging the gap between Yetzias Mitzrayim and Kabbalas HaTorah.